Hey everyone, it's Jeff, and welcome back to my playoff previews. And here's a funny fact. Coming into this video topic whatever, the Clippers are actually my championship favorites. Over the Lakers, over the Nets, over the Bucks. And when I started to rewatch the old Clippers games from this year, I was expecting to, watch games that would kind of reinforce that opinion. But actually, I'm going to have to walk back on that one, because despite adding Serge Ibaka, Rajon Rondo, Nick Batum, Luke Kennard, bunch of guys, right? I don't think they fixed the problems that plagued them last year against Denver in the postseason. And don't get me wrong, the Clippers are still a contender for me. Definitely still a heavyweight contender, but they're no longer the team that I would bet on. But before we get to that, let's talk about why they're so good in the first place. So first of all, I was surprised to see that their defense was only ranked 10th this year, despite the fact that they're playing Zubac a lot more, and they've also added Serge Ibaka. I'm just going to attribute that to Kawhi Leonard not going 100% on defense during the regular season. They've also had some injuries, but I don't think you can really use that as an excuse this year, just because everybody's dealt with that, so. But yeah, I think the defense is going to be a thing in the playoffs, of course. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are the two best, wing defender duo in the league. I don't think Ibaka is healthy right now, but he's still very good at defense, even if he is older. And Zubac is a more traditional, slower-footed guy, but still very reliable rim protector who he's going to struggle on the perimeter a lot more than Serge Ibaka at least, but against traditional big man and just kind of more traditional NBA styles of offenses, Zubac is going to do great. And of course, on offense, you have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, who are probably also the two best offensive wing duos in the league as well. It can be just super frustrating to guard those two because you can play perfect defense pretty much, but because they're both such great shot makers, they'll still hit those tough shots over you consistently and kind of basically break any defensive game plan you have because they're just that good. And adding Rajon Rondo definitely brings a level of stability and kind of just veteran calmness, I guess, that the Clippers didn't have last year, where when they were collapsing against the Nuggets, you can tell just based off body language and the energy they were playing with, they didn't have that accountability and just overall leadership in the locker room. Kawhi isn't really that much of a leader in terms of being vocal. He's always been more of a lead by example type of guy. And that leadership style, it works sometimes it doesn't. Same with the other overly brash, super loud, talkative style like Draymond Green. In certain situations, it works well. Other times, it doesn't. I'm not saying that one is better than the other one. I'm just saying, ideally you have two, right? And I don't think the Clippers had one last year. Especially because you had Paul George, who was just running his mouth and saying things he probably regrets saying. So yeah, adding someone who has a veteran leadership and experience in Rondo, who's been on multiple deep playoff runs, who just won a championship last year, it's going to help. However, some people are expecting Rondo to completely change it for them on offense in terms of, last year against Denver, the Clippers offense was kind of predictable. And the reason why they basically lost 3 games in a row were their offense is pretty much just ISO, ISO, ISO. They didn't really have any pass-first playmakers type of players who could help create shots for their teammates and get some, easier looks for Kawhi and Paul George instead of having them just, play one-on-one the entire game. And on paper, it looks like Rondo can be the type of guy, right? He's no longer in his prime, but, he proved last year with the Lakers that he can still get to the basket, draw some nice kick-out passes for some easy open shots from outside, still play some good defense when he's focused, and he can actually make some open three-pointers too when he's in the playoffs. For some reason in the regular season, it's just not there, but the second it's the postseason, Rondo's hitting from 3. And that's what I thought too. And that's why I had the Clippers as my championship favorites just last week when I was kind of just looking over things on paper. But after, watching some games with both Rondo and Kawhi, I'm gonna pull that back a little bit just because I don't actually think Rondo has changed their offense that much. And here's how I'm gonna simplify it. So the problem with the Clippers offense last season, against Denver was at some points, they literally did not have an offense, right? It was just Kawhi and Paul George playing one-on-one. And adding Rondo doesn't change that because just because you add a pass-first player, it doesn't automatically just give you an offensive system. That's not how it works, right? That's up to the coach. The coach has to implement a system with ball movement, off-ball screens, players cutting to the basket, stuff like that, right? Adding a singular player doesn't change that. And he can help when you already have a system like that, right? And all of a sudden you inject someone like that in, and now that player's passing opens up just a ton of avenues. But when you don't have that foundation to begin with, it's not as big of a deal as you think. And of course, Rondo's going to help because, even if it is a lot of still dribbling around and just simple pick and rolls, you give Rondo the ball, he's going to get to the basket, kick out easy shots, right? Like, I'm not saying Rondo's addition wasn't important. I just think that he's not having the impact that a lot of people who don't watch Clippers games think Rondo's going to have. The Clippers offense still very heavily circulates around just Paul George and Kawhi Leonard making really tough shots. And let me tell you, that still works very well most of the time because those two players are really good. And I'm not saying it's going to collapse in the playoffs, okay? I'm not claiming that at all. I'm just saying from a pure X's and O's standpoint, the Clippers' quote-unquote weakness from last year has not been fixed. However, if you're arguing that just because they have some more experienced and overall more offensively versatile guys in there like Serge Ibaka, Rajon Rondo, and I'll talk about Boogie in a second, that these guys can kind of take the pressure off of Kawhi and Paul George sometimes and just provide a stabilizing presence that, prevents the Clippers from imploding, then that is totally 100% completely fair. My point is just that when we saw those ugly 5-6 minute stretches last year, the Clippers just could not put the ball in the basket because it was just Kawhi and PG jacking up, contested 3-pointers or fadeaway 18-footers. Those type of shots still happen pretty frequently in the Clippers offense. Like whenever you see the Clippers go on a run, when they score 10 points, it's like a 10-2 run, it's because both Kawhi and PG are just making some damn good shots. Like, it's not because they're swinging the ball around a lot and their chemistry is just on point, right? And the ball is just zigging between people and they're just getting open layups and open 3-pointers. That's not the case. Oh yeah, and as for Demarcus Cousins, I think he does bring an interesting element in terms of just offensively. If you're putting a second string big man against him, there's a very high chance Cousins just eats. Problem is, defensively, he's just too slow at this point. He's tore his Achilles once in his ACL twice, I think. Oh wait, no, it was one torn ACL, one torn Achilles, and I think he ruptured his quad too. That is just too much to ask for to recover from a big man like that who's 7 feet tall, 280 whatever pounds. I think he's 270 actually, so 280 might be kind of mean. But yeah, you could use him kind of like Boban Marjanovic, but offensively he's more interesting just because he can shoot 3-pointers too. I think that Serge Ibaka and Zubac just be more reliable and more consistently good for the Clippers and more situations than Boogie, but there are some situations where the other team might throw out a smaller center who's perhaps not the best shooter, and Boogie can just go in there and just chew him up, basically. Fun fact, per 36 minutes, he's still averaging 23 points per game and 14 rebounds, so it just goes to show that Boogie still has it on offense. It's just defensively, yeah. Okay, so to recap, I think that they haven't exactly fixed their biggest on-court issue from last year when it comes to just having a stagnant offense. But just because both Kawhi and Paul George are just so good, you can live with that. And arguably the off-court just kind of locker room issues, or I don't think they're necessarily beefing with each other, but they might have just not liked each other as much as you wanted them to. You heard reports about how players are kind of irritated at Doc Rivers giving Kawhi Leonard special treatment. And I think adding someone like Rondo, he's by now, we know he's a good leader, and Cousins, who I think brings a fire and overall kind of just hunger at this point, because I think now whenever I see Boogie play, he's definitely playing with the energy that I didn't see him play back with the Kings, right? Because Boogie is literally fighting for his NBA survival right now. And hey, maybe the Clippers don't need another supposed hothead because they already have Patrick Beverly, who the other day, a few weeks ago, I saw him throw this really mean and dirty elbow at Chris Paul, and he got ejected for it, but I'm kind of surprised it wasn't a bigger deal than it was because it was pretty blatantly dirty to me. But hey, whatever. I also think that last year's embarrassment might kind of light a fire in the Clippers, where last year I feel like they were kind of playing like they already won a championship, whereas this season they probably want to redeem themselves, and maybe that just gives them that boost they need to beat the Clippers, or not the Clippers, sorry, the Lakers, or the Nuggets, or maybe even the Bucks or the Nets in the finals. I think against a fully healthy Lakers team where I can be guaranteed of Anthony Davis and LeBron James' health, I would probably still take the Lakers just because they deserve the benefit of the doubt. But I do think the Clippers would beat Denver, and I do think they could beat Utah too. I also think they match up very well against Phoenix, who, to be honest, I think Phoenix is still 1 year away from being true contenders, where they just need that one postseason to build experience and kind of get that taste, kind of like the Denver Nuggets back in 2019, I want to say, where they lost to, I think, the Blazers. They just need a postseason for experience. And to be honest, like, given how much the Nets have struggled with injuries, I would probably take the Clippers over the Nets too. Although, to be fair, if the Nets did make the finals, it probably means that their chemistry is, fine, so maybe not. We'll have to see about that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'll be doing the Phoenix Suns next probably, and I'll see you for that one.